Terrazzano, the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And today we're here with a simple message for the government. No taxation without representation. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is taking the Canada Revenue Agency to court for enforcing the undemocratic and illegal capital gains tax hike. The capital gains tax hike blows a hole through a fundamental principle of Canada's democracy while also blowing a hole in Canada's economy. No taxation without representation isn't just an important principle or a catchy slogan. It's enshrined in the Constitution of Canada. It's Parliament's job to approve tax increases, but the government failed to introduce the legislation, debate the legislation, pass the legislation, or proclaim the legislation into law. And with an election right around the corner, it likely never will. Yet unelected bureaucrats at the CRA are taking billions of dollars from Canadians with this undemocratic tax hike. This is a tax hike that will drag down our economy. This is a tax hike that punishes Canadians who work their entire lives to save for their retirements. This is a tax hike that will push young, smart Canadian graduates who want to start the next Google to leave Canada and set up businesses in other countries. To put it bluntly, this tax hike is a financial sucker punch to many Canadians who worked hard to invest in properties, create businesses, or save for their retirement.
You know, our democratic system is broken. Our parliament, that is. You have a lame duck prime minister, so low in the polls. In some demographics, he's in single digits. I'm not exaggerating. Young men in Saskatchewan and Alberta, it is single digit support for Justin Trudeau. He's dissolved parliament to avoid a confidence vote. He really is like a cornered animal. He's got a few weeks left. He's going to go nuts like Joe Biden. As you know, Joe Biden's final days, he was pardoning everyone, pardoning his friends, pardoning his families. I saw this story in the CBC. Did you see this one? There are about 10 empty seats in the Canadian Senate. Trudeau is going to go on an orgy of patronage appointments, 3 seats from Ontario. It'll be interesting to watch the candidates try and outdo each other. Is Rosemary Barton going to get it? Is Andrew Coyne going to get it? All these journalists you're going to see more sucking up in the next month than ever in Canadian history. That's what happens when you have a discredited lame duck prime minister who said he'll resign sometime in the future, but refuses to go. So how do you stop that? How do you stop an out of control train when the engineer's laughing because he's only got weeks left? Maybe you go to court. And that's what the Canadian Taxpayers Federation are doing about an illegal tax. Joining us now to talk about it is our friend Franco Terrazzano, the boss of the Taxpayers Federation. Franco, our parliament is broken. Can we find relief from the courts?
Well, we're going to win this challenge, okay? Now, folks, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we're taking the Canada Revenue Agency to court for enforcing the undemocratic and illegal capital gains tax hike. Now, Ezra, you've heard me say this before, no taxation without representation, okay? But it's not just an important principle or a catchy slogan. It is enshrined in the Constitution of Canada, okay? It's Parliament's job to approve tax increases. Well, the government has failed to introduce legislation, debate legislation, pass legislation, or proclaim legislation into law. And with an election likely right around the corner, it likely never will. And yet you still have these unelected bureaucrats at the CRA that are going to be taking billions of dollars from Canadians with this undemocratic tax hike. So, you know, at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we knew we couldn't let that stand. That's why we launched this legal challenge against the undemocratic and illegal capital gains tax hike. And we're going to win this one because what the government is doing is wrong.
You know, I want to read from your press release because you and I talk about politics and ideas, but really this is the stuff of real life, of ordinary people who are making decisions in their lives, and the government is doing a sneak attack on them. Could I read just one paragraph from your press release? And folks, you can find this at the Taxpayers Federation website. The headline is, Taxpayers Launching Court Fight Against Undemocratic Capital Gains Tax Hike. Let me just read 2 sentences, okay? The CTF, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, is representing Debbie Vorstveld, a resident of Mapleton, Ontario. Last year, she and her husband, Willem, sold a property that included a secondary home. They had rented the secondary home to their adult children, but had to sell it when the kids were ready to move on. The CRA says the Vorstvelds must pay higher capital gains under the proposed capital gains increase or face financial penalties. So you can just imagine literally millions of Canadians making life decisions about something they've worked on building their whole lives, a secondary home, a business. These are regular folks. I don't know the Vorstvelds. I'm guessing they're not gazillionaires. And you've got this illegitimate, unfounded tax hike that is surely to be swatted down in the next election, but it's being collected against them. That is really infuriating. I'm so glad you're helping them, but they're emblematic of millions, aren't they?
Well, that's exactly right. And I'm glad you brought up this story, right? Because at the end of the day, it's easy to throw figures at people like the fact that the capital gains will mean 400,000 fewer jobs. But at the end of the day, it's these individual stories like this family who are being penalized with an undemocratic and illegal tax hike. And to your point, like not only are we doing it to stick up for this family, but what we're trying to do is set a precedent that what the government is doing is wrong here. It's undemocratic and it's illegal. And we're trying to protect the thousands of Canadians who will be impacted by this capital gains tax hike. Now, many times you've heard the government spin, right? Oh, we're just gonna be going after the monopoly man with this tax hike. No. Okay, this is going to affect more than 1 million Canadians, half of whom earn $117,000 or less. Okay, this is a financial sucker punch to people who worked hard their entire lives to invest in properties, to create businesses and put their neighbors to work, and to save for their own retirement. But not only that, this is also a tax hike that will push that young, smart Canadian graduate who wants to start the next Google here to leave Canada and set up shop in another country.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that because Trump is really jabbing at Trudeau over the 51st state and all that. And some people laugh that off, but there was a poll by Ipsos last week, which is a very reputable pollster, and it showed young people, again, young men in particular, they're open to it. And I think it's about prosperity. So when you say young people would consider leaving, I mean, Trump is saying, hey, just join us. But no, we're talking about a brain drain again. I mean, if you watch America, and I know we all do, is we're all riveted. He is cutting taxes, cutting spending, cutting regulations, that whole DOGE idea, Department of Government Efficiency. If you're a young person and you're ready to start something, are you going to start it under a country that's going to ratchet up carbon tax every year? Or are you going to say, you know what? I can live in California, Florida, Texas, better weather maybe in the winter, and I'll be able, I mean, I really think that this is a competitive moment for Canada. Your lawsuit is not just going to save individual families, it'll change the whole temperament of taxes in this country.
Well, we hope so. And Ezra, I'm glad you keep bringing it back to the person level, right? I mean, people can't afford groceries, right? The idea of owning a home is loss for so many people who are in their 20s or 30s, right? Like, think about it. If you can barely afford to pay rent, you can't save to buy that home, to start the family, right? I mean, look, things are very tough right now. And one of the biggest reasons for this was all the massive money printing we saw in Ottawa, the massive tax increases, the runaway deficits, the crazy amount of money that the government is borrowing. Now, to circle back to this outrageously undemocratic and illegal capital gains tax hike, like the Liberals in the 2021 election never even ran on a capital gains tax hike. Okay. Yeah. And this mess is the Trudeau government's own creation. Okay. They chose to not pass the capital gains tax hike with the budget. They were going to use it as a partisan wedge issue. They chose to prorogue Parliament. Okay. So think about this. They first announced the capital gains tax hike in their budget. What was it, last April? Well, Parliament is shut down until March 24th. So it will have been almost a full year since the capital gains tax hike was announced. And the legislation, forget not even being passed, it hasn't even been introduced.